If you wish to see a very unfortunate example of this in the something similar to what we're reading here in the Jewish world today, you need look no further than a certain Hassidic sect based in 770 in New York. You will note that wherever you have true believers in that religion, then you will note that there are these huge photographs of their Rebbe. Any truly staunch Beth Knesset dedicated or connected to such a system will always have in plain sight a huge picture of this person, and it is a fact for all those who wish to acknowledge the facts that this is the object. This becomes the object of their worship, or at least they are so confused as to what exactly the object of their worship is, and to whom they are devoted, and who is the true power. There's so much confusion amongst them that it's almost as if it's taken out of these words that we're reading here. And it's not very different from another similar system, Christianity, where the true devotion and focus of certainly of the majority of Christians around the world is not he to whom they refer as the Father, but he to whom they refer as the Son. That is who they speak of. That is the image on the wall, if they have images, if depending on the sect, or that is what the cross represents. They mention that name in their prayers all the time. All their thoughts and all their efforts and all their formulations are focused on that image or that photograph or that person. In other words, we see that when you create any intermediary, whatever, between Hashem and yourself, the focus will always gravitate towards that intermediary, and not, even if you're claiming there's a Hashem above and behind or together with or whatever, however you imagine it, the focus will always be on that intermediary or that connecting that link. That's the reality. We see this wherever we turn. We see this.
Do you think that in that sect which you mentioned, do you think the confusion that is present in many of its devotees was planted there deliberately?
Planted deliberately by whom?
By that individual or his disciples?
One could probably write volumes about this, and probably this is something that should be done. In other words, someone probably should write some kind of history of the stages, and development and evolution of the Lubavitch system, because I think there was, and probably still is, in other words, it's ongoing, a certain evolution in their belief system, in their notions and their ideas. And it's known that there were, going back several generations, there were people within that system, within that Hasidut, who broke away from it because they saw certain strange and unacceptable things beginning to appear. Without going into all the details, but that's an historical fact. There was always a danger of this kind of thought developing and evolving into something which is plainly related to Avodah Zarah. There was always such a danger. And it begins with certain certain interpretations of certain Kabbalistic concepts, such as the Tzimtzum, which are attributed initially to the Baal Shem Tov, more particularly in greater detail and with greater historical veracity. Well, there's more proof that this is the case when it comes to teachings of the Baal Tanya and others who followed him. And I think this is why, and I think the Gaon Mivilna Zal, and this is why I think he refused to meet. I'm guessing, I don't know. I wasn't there. We don't have any document or testimony to this effect, but one has to wonder why Rabbeinu Eliyahu Mivilna literally fled his home in Vilna and disappeared into the forest or somewhere, so that when the Baal Tanya came to see him, he wouldn't find him, which is a fact. And the reason the Gra was so opposed to certain teachings of the what was then a fairly nascent Hassidic movement. It should be noted that the vast majority of Hasidim know nothing about these things nowadays. The most Hasidic sects today have nothing to do with Avodah Zarah, or very little at least, and it's essentially a social and organizational paradigm for organizing and forming and maintaining a certain social structure and community, and there's a certain power and in that, and there's something even to learn from that reality and that approach. So if you ask your average Gera Chosid or Belze Chosid or Satmar Chosid today, for example, and you could go on, Vizhnitz and Biala and whatever it is, and ask them questions about related to these things, they wouldn't know what you're talking about. In fact, it needs to be stated for the record that most Hasidim, the majority, are very unlearned, very unschooled, and that's almost deliberate. The schools to which they go, the yeshivot to which they go, are not trying to create Talmidei Chachamim. They're trying to create people who will fit into the system and work in a certain way and do as they're told. And there's something to be said for that as well, because it's good that people do what they're told when what they're being told is the correct thing by people who know. That's a good thing. The idea that everybody knows what they should do when they're 13 or 16 or 18 or 20, that is a false idea. The Torah always tells us to ask the elders, Sha'al Zekenecha. But so there should be this idea of hierarchy and tradition and a community and a society that has certain codes and traditions, and it's not a free for all. That is true. But we also know that it does not manifest itself in the real world always correctly. So I know from my own experiences that many people, for example, in the Satmar world, people brought up in the Satmar world, the vast majority of them are, to be frank, Amei Aretz, Pashut. What they wear has nothing to do with what they know, or what they learn, or how much they learn. Some of them learn more, some of them learn less. I'm not saying you won't find any Talmidei Chachamim amongst them, but the majority are not such. They're not, and they were never trained to, and it was never anyone's aim that they be such people. The aim was that they be kept away from dangerous influences. That's also something that needs to be acknowledged, that there's something in that, and lead them along a certain path in life, and go into some kind of business or trade, commerce, merchant, whatever it is, a shopkeeper, whatever it might be, to make a living, Of course, each Hasidic community needs its Rebbe, needs its Rav, needs its Posek, whatever it is, but you don't need to create a yeshiva system that produces thousands of such people. For that, you only need a handful. And that's what they have, by and large. I know this is true in the world of Satmar Hasidim. I know it because they've told me so, and I've seen it. And they told me themselves what they learned and what they didn't learn in school, in yeshiva, and what they were taught and what they know in many cases is very, very little. And they themselves, some of them, realize this. The ones who spoke to me realized this. They said this to me. I saw this. I heard it. And there's no doubt about this. And I don't think Satmar is very different from Vizhnitz. And I don't think Vizhnitz is very different from Belz. And I know a little bit about those Chassiduyot as well. I've spoken to fewer of them, perhaps, but I know something about them. So the Hasidic world, by and large, today does not represent and is not truly rooted in the teachings that are attributed to the Baal Shem Tov, or in the case of Lubavitch Chabad, to the Baal Tanya, or certain other Hasidic leaders, or the Magen Mizrich, shall we say. There's a famous a book by the Magen Mizrich called Magid Devarol Yaakov, a more or less scientific version or edition, I should say, of this book was published some decades ago, perhaps 30 years ago or 25 years ago, by Professor I think Rivka Schatzes was her name. And you find some very, very strange ideas in that Sefer. I have the Sefer, I've looked at it. Very, very unusual, very, very suspect. It really makes you wonder. And the Magen Mizrich basically was he who took over the Hasidic movement after the Baal Shem Tov. So even though it was not necessarily his most in real terms, in terms of how much time he knew the Baal Shem Tov or learned from, he wasn't necessarily his greatest student. In that sense, he was essentially of his own making. He knew he got to know the Baal Shem Tov at a certain point, but he was already a more or less fully formed individual, as opposed to the Rabbi Polnoi or others who were much closer to the Baal Shem Tov over a much longer period of time. And you don't hear the same ideas. You just don't find the same ideas there. It's it's almost as if they learn from different people. It's quite interesting, quite surprising. But anyhow, I mentioned all this simply to say that in the current reality, in this generation, it's only Lubavitch Chabad that represents that extreme, radical, Avodah Zarah tainted ideology and practice and outlook. And that's something that needs to be kept in mind. But on the one hand, it has to be kept in mind that it's only particular groups, or what that particular group, and maybe you might be able to mention one or two others. But essentially, it's that group as opposed to the overall Hasidic, the various Hasidic communities. There's something very different.